Hey, we will continue to let people in as they arrive, but let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to say welcome and thank you so much for joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Please make sure that you are muted. Go ahead and type questions in the chat as you have them, and we will answer them after our speakers are done with their presentations. And we will also ask for questions at the end of the presentations too, and you can raise your hand and ask your question in person. So as an introduction, my name is Meghan Sloma. By training, I am a realtor and an attorney. I'm also a fourth generation part owner of a Century Farm in Sioux County. In 2021, I was notified that we were along the route of phase 1 of Summit's CO2 pipeline. However, because I've always been classified as just a neighbor during these proceedings, I was denied any participation before the IUC. Why are we here today? We are here because we thankfully are a nation of freedom and rights. However, one right ends when it infringes on the rights of another. I think that's a very, very important principle. In contemplating HF 639, Governor Reynolds had to balance two rights. She had to balance my right to have autonomy over my family's Century Farm, and she had to consider Summit's right to engage in a risky startup that involves taking our land by eminent domain. So she weighed those rights, my rights and Summit's rights, and she chose Summit. She chose Summit over hundreds of landowners, and she has allowed them to trample on our property rights. If you are one of those landowners that she chose Summit over you and your family and your land, you just go ahead and wave. See that sea of red. That sea of red, those are the folks that have spent the last 4 years wearing red because red means rights. We've been fighting for property rights. At the end of the day, Summit's rights should come to a clear end when a landowner exercises their right to say no to an easement on their land. My dad told me growing up to never bring him a problem without also bringing him possible solutions. So I would ask Governor Reynolds, what is your solution to help the landowners, if not HF 639? It has been a 4-year odyssey to bring HF 639 to your desk. What would you want to see on your desk instead? I'm now going to turn it over to our other speakers. I'd first like to introduce Judy Glade from Wright County.
Hi, my name is Julie Glade, and I'm an affected landowner in Wright County. To say that I'm deeply disappointed is an understatement, and frankly, I'm righteously angry that Governor Reynolds has vetoed HF 639. We've been fighting for 4 years for meaningful protections from eminent domain abuse by a private company that wants to take our land against our will. Governor Reynolds, I'd like for you to tell me how modern life depends on the pumping of a waste product, highly pressurized and dangerous, through our very productive, rich family farmland. I feel like she's thrown us under the bus and is sided with wealthy corporate interests in the state of Iowa. It seems to me that politically connected Summit Carbon Solutions is depending on this project to line their pockets with billions of our taxpayer dollars and leaving landowners with all the risks. Without HF 639 and the liability protections it would have provided, if a rupture would occur on our property and someone would be hurt, we could be sued for damages. We could lose our entire farm for a project we never asked for that we don't want. I would say it's a no-brainer that if a corporation can't afford insurance required to protect Iowans from their hazardous project, they can't afford to be in business. Governor Reynolds, you've also said that passing HF 639 would threaten Iowa's reputation as a place where businesses can invest with confidence. Without common sense landowner protections, farmers won't have the confidence to invest in their farming operations when it could be taken away from them by eminent domain. Wouldn't you say that the backbone of the state is and always has been the business of farming? We've been in this fight for 4 years, and every year we've gained momentum. People are paying attention like never before. I've noticed a real difference this year. People are coming to us and asking us questions quite often. My phone was exploding yesterday with messages from friends and family that heard the breaking news that Governor Reynolds had vetoed our bill. This is going to be a high priority issue, election issue from here on out. We are going to make sure of it. We can do what South Dakota did and elect representatives that will reflect the will of the majority in Iowa, unlike Governor Reynolds and her minions in Senate leadership. We look forward to working with a growing number of Iowa legislators that want to stand with Iowans against this abuse of eminent domain. This is far from over. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Next, I would like to invite Marty Maher for his remarks.
Thank you. I'm a Page County landowner, an affected landowner. Governor Reynolds, by your veto of HF639, you have classified those of us that support it as unreasonable. Perhaps your opinion is the result of your lack of leadership on this issue for 4 years. You seem to think that Iowa landowners that you supposedly protect should be exposed to liability issues caused by a multi-billion-dollar pipeline. We cannot insure against their mishaps, but you seem to think they should not be held responsible. Governor Reynolds, you seem to have forgot that the purpose of eminent domain is the right of government, not a private entity, to take private property for public use, That does not mean a private entity seeking to score huge federal tax credits using our land. Governor Reynolds, you said that eminent domain must be a last resort. Well, what classifies as a last resort? 5% unsigned easements? 20%? 30%? 50%? Or do you care about Iowa landowners as long as a favored corporation is involved in the taking of our land? Governor, what have you done in the last 4 years to limit the use of eminent domain? I can think of nothing. We will be back in 2026 to see if you live up to the promises that you made in this veto letter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marty. I love the shirt too. Hopefully everybody can see that. That's awesome. Okay, next I'd like to call on Bremer County Supervisor Corey Cerwinske.
Thank you, Megan. Megan said I'm District 2 Supervisor for Bremer County. Bremer County's been in this fight for several years now. It started with Navigator, and now we're a Phase 2 route county, currently in litigation with 2 lawsuits from Summit over local ordinances. The decision yesterday by the governor to veto House File 639 is, in my opinion, is extremely disheartening for the people of Iowa. Her reasoning is absolutely flawed from any and every angle that you examine it. This isn't an agree to disagree circumstance, as we sometimes see ourselves varying over legislation. This veto is an outright attack on our inalienable rights that we, the people, are protected by both our U.S. and Iowa constitutions. Governor, she's tried to justify her motives for the economic survival of our state, and people of Iowa fully understand that she only means the corporate interests, especially those that have donated significantly to her own finances. She has invalidated the will of the people and the value of the individual vote at the ballot box that have resoundingly sent the message to Des Moines recently to protect private property rights above all else. Her justification to protect the economy ignores the impact and contributions of small businesses and family farms across Iowa, which have built and carried the state's economy now for almost 2 centuries. Current proposed CO2 pipeline projects in Iowa will cause undeniably more economic harm to family farms and residents than any recognized benefits outside of the chosen few insiders well connected to the summit and the Rastetter-Branstad cabal seeking to reap copious amounts of redistributed tax dollars via the federal 45Q tax credits. Thousands of acres of our highly productive farmland will be damaged by construction, suffer reduced productivity for years due to compaction. Improvements to that land, such as future tiling, will become significantly more expensive when and if needed to be performed. Land near the pipeline routes has become less valuable already due to restrictions of use and safety concerns. And most importantly, in my case, the health and well-being of hundreds of thousands of Iowans near the proposed pipeline routes are at grave risk. Anyone with a basic understanding of statistics can extrapolate that it's not if, but when the catastrophic release of this deadly, when needlessly concentrated, asphyxiating gas will be released once in operation. I personally last week delivered to Governor and our legal team data from an expert in fluid dynamics to provide context to the unique concerns for safety that this project brings to the population that are fortunate enough to reside along the proposed route. PHMSA issued draft regulations concerning these same issues in January of this year. Her statement following up regarding the insurance requirements as burdensome contained in 639 completely ignores this reality. In the end, the audacity to ignore the will of all Iowans that Governor Reynolds has displayed in this battle over the past several years, combined with the realities of the effects that these proposed pipelines have on the landowners of Iowa, in my opinion, is unforgivable. Her action to veto this bill is a violation of her oath of office to support and defend the constitutions of Iowa and the United States. Governor Reynolds has single-handedly yesterday erased our state motto and replaced it with, quote unquote, our liberties will be denied and our rights will be subverted. I have little faith in the corrupt and complicit Senate leadership in our state to convene and make any good faith effort to override this veto, despite the overwhelming support this effort has in the House. I suggested to Speaker Grassley that in addition to an attempted override, that our General Assembly address the glaring issue of the governor's malfeasance by ignoring the Constitution to decimate our private property rights with her actions, by going forward and introducing articles of impeachment under the guidelines contained in Article 3, Section 20 of the Iowa Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate those remarks. Next, I'd like to call on Peg Rasmussen.
Hello, my name is Peg Rasmussen. I'm a landowner in Montgomery County. I am one of the 78% of Iowans who believe that eminent domain should not be used for private projects like Summit Carbon Solutions. As one of the 78%, I consider myself to be a reasonable person. But unlike what Governor Reynolds says, I don't believe that reasonable people disagree on when property should be allowed to be taken by a for-profit company. Reasonable people agree that eminent domain should not be granted to any company that provides no benefit to the people. For 4 years, Iowa landowners have been asking elected officials to protect us from investors who want to take our land, damage our land, and expose us to significant risk so that they can line their pockets with lucrative tax credits. This is common sense that reasonable people agree with. In Governor Reynolds' veto, she states that House File 639 would have set a troubling precedent, when in fact, the Iowa Utilities Commission decision to grant the use of eminent domain for a carbon capture pipeline is the actual troubling precedent. What's so wrong with having a reasonable standard set and making a company prove that it can meet that standard? We can do better. In addition, Governor Reynolds states we are at the forefront of turning corn into low carbon energy. But at what cost, Governor? The cost of taking our land through eminent domain? The cost of the loss of insurability? The cost of lowered land values? The cost of safety to humans, animals, and our ecosystem? The cost of using 3+ gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of ethanol, in the meantime depleting our aquifers. I personally find it insulting that Governor Reynolds continues to ignore the fact that Iowa farmers are businesses that the Iowa economy has relied on for a couple of centuries. She consistently pits Iowa agriculture against, quote, businesses that can invest with confidence. But what we really know that what she means by businesses are big corporations. Governor Reynolds, how about investing in Iowa farmers and offering them lucrative incentives to modernize and diversify their operations and put that success and that money into the pockets of Iowans and the coffers of Iowa cities and counties? Governor Reynolds stated that she shares the bill's goal of protecting landowners. Yet we must ask her, what exactly have you done in the last 4 years to protect a single landowner affected by Summit Carbon Solutions' proposed project? A true leader steps in when a problem arises, and you, Governor Reynolds, did nothing. The legacy you leave behind is one of bowing down to big business at the expense of Iowans. The fight for private property rights will continue. Iowa legislators and Governor Reynolds will see you at the Capitol in 2026, and we can't wait to tell our legislators how we feel about their votes in the 2026 election. Thank you for listening today.
Thank you so much, Peg. And last but certainly not least, we have Representative Steve Holt for his remarks.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here with everyone. I'm sorry that we're here under these circumstances. I would simply say, as the individual who floor managed House File 639 and who floor managed 3 out of the 4 bills over the last 3.5, 4 years to try to protect landowners, that this veto I consider to be a disingenuous betrayal of the Iowa Constitution, of the Republican Party platform of Iowa, and of the landowners of Iowa who have fought for 4 years to try to protect their basic fundamental constitutional rights. Her veto statement was incredible to me when she said that she shares the goal of protecting landowners. So having been in this fight for 4 years, I first alerted the governor 3.5, 4 years ago when I went to a landowner meeting in Shelby County, and I sent her pictures. I sent her texts. We had a conversation on the phone. She has done nothing, unfortunately. She has done nothing. As we ran these 4 pieces of legislation, I never heard from her office. I never heard from her. When we were running House File 639, this specific bill, through subcommittee, through committee, and through floor debate, never one time did I hear from her office over the concerns that she expressed in her veto statement. Where were her bills? Where were her ideas if she shares the goal of protecting landowners? That is just a disingenuous statement that is betrayed by the facts of the fact that there was a total leadership void from her office over the past 3.5 or 4 years. And that's why we are where we are today. To Julie and Peg's point, I could not agree with them more. This fight is far from over. And it has exposed, unfortunately, the difference between what I will call country club Republicans and grassroots Republicans who respect landowner rights and the Constitution of the state of Iowa. The fight is far from over. I'm honored to be with you guys today. Thank you.
Thank you so very much to all of our speakers. I am not seeing any questions in the chat, but if any of the press had a question they'd like to raise their hand, we can call on you and allow you to voice your question, and we'll get you an answer. Okay, so at this time, I'd like to call on Amanda Roker.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This is maybe a question for Representative Holt or you, Megan, if you want to take it. One of the things the governor mentioned was the 25-year limit on permits in the letter, that was one of the reasons that she decided to veto the bill. Could you react to that response? And then also, if you were pushing for future legislation, do you feel it necessary to include that 25-year limit again?
I would simply mention that when after this bill finally passed in the Senate, which I think Governor Reynolds and senators did not think they would ever have to face this issue because they thought they would be able to stop it using process. And that's why we're here, where we are today. But when I met with Governor Reynolds and her staff, I told her if there was any specific things in this bill that they were concerned about, we could address them in the next legislative session, as long as it did not, impact current landowners in their struggle against eminent domain. If there were other things that they were concerned about in terms of economic development, such as the 25-year limit, that we could certainly have a discussion on those things in the next session. That a veto was not necessary. The world wouldn't come to an end in 6 months. That was ignored. I think the 25-year limit makes a lot of sense to me, considering the nature of this technology, how different it is from other projects for which eminent domain has been used. But again, the governor had the opportunity and was given the opportunity by me to have a discussion in the next session if she was concerned about that or any other issues. She ignored that and chose to veto.
I would just add a couple things to that. The 25-year permit part only applies to carbon pipelines. So there's absolutely no proof that HF639 would kill projects such as Trailblazer, Sire, anything like that that was mentioned in Governor Reynolds' veto letter. Also, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe that the project viability was based on it going for something like 13 years. So 25 years is way more than needed for this project. So let's move on to our next question. I would call on Stephen Gruber Miller. You can unmute and ask your question, please.
Hey, thanks for doing the press conference. This is, I think, mostly for Representative Holt as well, but the speaker has called for a special session to override the veto. Wondering if you're supportive of that and how many of your colleagues you think are supportive. And then also, we heard somebody on this call for impeaching the governor, and I wonder to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm 100% in support of overriding the veto. The veto is egregious. We have lost the high ground. The Republican Party of Iowa has always had the high ground on protecting landowner rights, all the way back to 2006 when the Iowa GOP chair, Jeff Kaufman, floor managed legislation protecting landowners. I believe that Governor Reynolds was in the legislature at that time and on the other side of the issue. So maybe that's telling in terms of where we are today. I 100% support overriding that veto. And I think numerous members of the House will be as well. Unfortunately, I doubt we'll have the votes in the Senate to do that, but we're going to do everything that we can. In terms of impeachment, look, I understand everybody's emotions on this, but a governor choosing to veto a piece of legislation in spite of what we feel about how it may violate the Constitution and those sorts of things probably doesn't rise to the level of impeachment. So I doubt that would gain much traction. But I understand the emotions. I understand why people are concerned and feel that it is a violation of her oath, because the Constitution is pretty clear on eminent domain being used only for public use and not for private economic development projects.
Thank you very much. I would like to call on Aaron Murphy now, if you can unmute and ask your question.
Thank you again to everybody for doing the call. And I, again, have a question for Representative Holt. Pardon me, sorry. Forward-looking, because of the challenges you just described with getting approval for a special session in the Senate, I'm curious, looking ahead to next year's session, we've heard so many of the speakers, including yourself today, talk about that this fight will continue. Could you kind of give me a sense of how you imagine that discussion going next year, working on legislation again, and not just what is in the legislation itself, but the need to work with the Senate and the governor's office to get something that could be signed into law, given how tough this has been for everyone here to swallow, and the things that we've heard in the hours since this veto announcement was made. I'm just kind of curious to get your sense of what you think that process will look like next January and on.
Well, I would say the country club Republicans in the Senate need to come to the realization that we're not going to back down. There's only so much compromise we're going to be willing to do. The Iowa Constitution and the Republican Party platform of Iowa is clear on the use of eminent domain for private economic development projects. We're not going to compromise on that. We're going to fight until landowners are protected. And I think the Constitution is very clear. Unfortunately, the Iowa Utilities Commission didn't see it that way. We have court action pending. We'll see where that goes. We're going to continue to introduce legislation. We're going to continue to force the issue, and the Senate's going to have to figure out what they're going to do about it. You know, they tried for over 4 years. They stopped the will of the people through their elected representatives to address this issue. They hid behind process and refused to let legislation come to the floor. And now the chickens have come home to roost in the Senate. They've got a civil war going on in the Senate. They've attacked one another on the floor, or at least those who don't want landowners to be protected have attacked those 12 brave senators, Kevin Alonzo in particular, who chose to stand up for landowners and stand up for the Constitution, the Republican Party platform of Iowa. This is not going to go away. And I also think that the tactics that have been used, the attacks on those who, we didn't start this civil war in the Republican Party. I suppose you could call it that to some degree. Those who are standing with the Republican Party platform, those who are standing with the Iowa Constitution, didn't start this. All we needed was an up or down vote in the Iowa Senate. So there's also going to be consequences. Let's face it. There's going to be consequences in terms of those who use tactics and have called those who have stood with landowners environmental extremists. There are going to be consequences for all of those things. And there's going to be consequences for the governor's agenda in the disingenuous way in which she vetoed this, and her lack of leadership over a 4-year period on this issue is why we are where we are today. The governor's lack of leadership is why we are where we are today, and it will affect her agenda going forward until the end of her term.
Thank you. I would now like to call on Cami Coons to ask her question. You can unmute and ask your question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for your time today. One of the, excuse me, one of the points in the governor's letter and that has been brought up by opponents of the bill is talking about the Sire project, which does have 100% voluntary easements in the project, and saying that this bill has unintended consequences to other projects outside of, or projects that aren't even trying to use eminent domain. Do you kind of deny that the bill would have impacted those projects in that way?
I'll let Representative Holt speak to that.
Well, first off, I would say, where's her ideas? Where's her leadership over 4 years? I gave her the opportunity during meetings with her office. I said, if you have any concerns, let us know. Didn't hear from her. All she did was veto. So I don't think those concerns are valid. No, I don't. However, again, she had 4 years to put her own ideas forward on how to protect landowners. She did not do that. She owns that. That's her legacy.
And I would add specifically on the Sire project, the Sire project, it's the Trailblazer carbon pipeline that's mostly in Nebraska and other states. There's a small section, maybe 6 miles in Iowa, and kind of under the radar, they got those voluntary easements. It's just a handful. It's nothing compared to what Summit is seeking in Iowa. And if that bill were to pass, there is no guarantee that it would kill the Trailblazer project. 6 miles of a extensive pipeline that's in other states is not going to kill the project. So that's a fear-mongering talking point with no proof ever provided.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I would call on Hannah Fingerhut to ask her question, please.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for doing this. And apologies to direct another question to Representative Holt. Just to kind of follow up on looking forward here, part of this process, and I recognize that there are some, criticisms of Republican senators not being willing to kind of sit down earlier in the session, perhaps, that it was kind of at the last minute that some of the, negotiations came down. But I am curious, to Erin's question about, in theory, you do need the Senate to pass any legislation. And so, will there be, and we did see, right, some proposals from Senator Booslow, for example, as far as efforts to protect land now and in the future. So I suppose my question is, will you be willing or interested in sitting down with Senator Buslow or any other senator that's willing to sit down with you and kind of negotiate this starting now, starting in January? What will that look like?
Well, first of all, the timing issue as far as last minute was the Senate leadership's decision, not ours. They chose not to do anything for 4 years, and then in the end, with this, they chose to wait until the last minute because they thought they would have the votes to prevent it from coming to the floor. So there's that. I already sat down and talked with Senator Buslow. Senator Buslow's amendment did absolutely nothing to protect landowners currently involved in the fight against eminent domain for the CO2 pipelines. It stripped those protections away. In fact, it basically gave Summit a monopoly for eminent domain and said no eminent domain for CO2 pipelines going forward. Well, that's fantastic for Summit because Summit gets to use eminent domain for their project, but nobody else can. So that was a dream bill for Summit. It was disingenuous and it did nothing to protect landowners. So that amendment was a poison pill because it did absolutely nothing to protect landowners currently. He knew that. And so I will sit down with anyone and have discussions at any time. But what is not negotiable is the Iowa Constitution that says eminent domain is for public use projects. What is not negotiable is the platform of my party, which says that eminent domain should not be used for private economic development and should not be used for the CO2 pipeline project. So if folks want to come to the table with genuine ideas to protect landowners, the House is there.
Thank you very much. Amanda, did you have another question you can unmute and ask?
I did. I'm sorry for asking a second question. And again, sorry to direct another question to Representative Holt, but thank you for your accessibility and availability to answer our questions today. I know one of the things you had mentioned was, I'm sorry, there's a little bit of background noise in the newsroom. I've asked this, so hopefully you can hear me. One of the things you had mentioned is that this will impact the governor's agenda going forward next year. I know Representative Kaufman had told some reporters that he may not vote for things that the governor that brings up as her top priorities next session. I'm just curious as to what specifically you mean by this decision impacting her agenda during her last legislative session next year.
So here's the bottom line. I mean, for every action, there's equal and opposite reaction. As I said, we fought for landowners for 4 years. We sent 4 pieces of legislation over to the Senate. One got to the governor's desk. The governor had ample opportunity to weigh in during the last 4 years and to advance her own ideas. She did not. And so it's disingenuous to say that she shares the goal of protecting landowners. When it comes to her agenda, as Representative Kaufman said, her agenda is going to be much harder because of the results of what she did. The majority of Republicans, let's bear in mind, the majority of Republicans voted for House File 639 and she vetoed it. And that of course will have a consequence. Now, I try to always base my decisions on what legislation goes forward and what does not, on is it good public policy or not. That should always be what legislators do. Is it good public policy or not? Having said that, though, when it comes to a lot of different things that in the scheme of things are not necessarily based upon principle, her actions are going to have an impact. It's that simple. And Representative Kaufman has already alluded to that. It will absolutely have impact. It will absolutely make it much more difficult to advance her agenda going forward. And she has to own that.
Thank you. Representative Holt, could you briefly walk us through what it would take for a special session to be called? What that process looks like briefly? Well,
I believe it's a 2/3 majority of both chambers, and that's the problem we have. I think we will most certainly meet that threshold in the Iowa House. Senator Whitford has already come out and said that he doesn't think the Senate will be interested in doing that. Surprise, surprise. I mean, they stood in the way of protecting landowners for 4 years. That's the difference between the Senate and the House. And in terms of the grassroots Republicans who support the effort in the House to protect landowners. So there's nothing that we can do in the House to force the Senate to hold a special session. That means we will continue to advance legislation in the coming session to protect landowners, and we're going to continue this battle because again, we've always had the high ground. The Republican Party has always had the high ground on this issue. Thanks to the governor's veto, we now have lost that high ground, and we will do all we can. Those of us who understand our platform and the Iowa Constitution will continue to do all we can to regain the high ground and to protect landowners. But as far as the special session is concerned, there's not a lot we can do if the Senate makes the decision or doesn't have the 2/3 majority.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our speakers once again, and thank you all for joining us. I think it's pretty safe to say that we're at 4 years and counting. This issue is not over. I'm going to put my email in the chat. If you have any questions, you can send them my way. If you're needing any other resources, if you want to be put in touch with other landowners, anything like that, feel free to reach out. I'd like to kind of do a last call for questions here. If anybody has questions, raise your hand. Otherwise, we will let you get on with, I think it's going to be a beautiful day. So we'll wait for questions here for a second. Well, thanks again. We appreciate all your attention to this issue. We really do. Thank you, everyone.